All right. Well, welcome to our first political segment. I don't remember if I really queued anything up earlier about what we were going to talk about.
No, you can tell them now. Tell the
Um,
people now.
But in Iowa, a bill has just been sent to Kim Reynolds' desk. And it's obviously got a lot of people upset, which means it's a good bill. It will essentially, it takes gender identity out of, I'm blanking on
the public
word.
place, essentially.
But it out of the civil rights, out of the Iowa Civil Rights Act, or all that. I don't think that's quite the right term, but it basically we're removing gender identity, and it's you have your sex, you're male or you're female, that's it. So going back to common sense, the way God designed things, going back to that.
Yep.
So kind of this, I'm just looking at the Iowa legislature thing here. I don't know if this is kind of just an overview or explanation, kind of what it is. An act. So it's a bill for an act relating to sex and gender, including those and related terms, for purposes of statutory construction, indications of a person's sex on certain vital records, gender identity under the Iowa Civil Rights Act, and school curricula related to gender theory, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa. I don't know if I just want to read this here. I'll just keep going. In the construction of statutes, the following rules shall be observed with regard to a person's biological sex. A sex, when used to classify or describe a natural person, means the state of being either male or female as observed or clinically verified at birth. When used in reference to a natural person, a female means an individual who has had, will have through the course of a normal development, or would have, but for a developmental anomaly, genetically anomaly, or accident, a reproductive system that at some point produces an ova. And a male means an individual who has, will have through the course of a normal development, or would have, but for a development anomaly, genetic anomaly, or accident, a reproductive system at some point will produce sperm. The term woman or girl refers to a female, and the term man or boy refers to a male. The term mother means a parent who is female, and the term father means a parent who is male. Gender, when used alone in reference to males, females, or the natural difference between males and females, shall be considered a synonym for sex, and shall not be considered a synonym or shortened expression for gender identity. Experienced gender, whatever that means, gender expression, or gender role. The term equal does not mean same or identical. Separate accommodations are not inherently unequal. A person born with a medically verified diagnosis of disorder or difference of sex development shall be provided the legal protection and accommodations affordable under the Federal Americans with Disability Acts of 1990 and applicable state law. Any state law, policy, or program that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex shall be construed or forbid unfair treatment of females or males in relation to similarly stated members of the opposite sex. I don't know, keep
There's
going on
a
for a
lot
while.
of pages. I was going to say a lot of these bills are like hundreds of pages.
Yeah, I think that kind of if it's at the top of the page.
No, it's
the
basically
most
just saying, hey, there's two genders, male, female. You still can't, base decision making off of, or things like that off of male or female. It's just taking off all the other, infinite genders basically.
So
that
there's 86 today.
The biggest thing about this
if
is
there's
it
86,
takes
then
gender
there can be 860.
identity out of state law.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep.
Out of the state constitution.
Yep.
This is the first state to do it.
Good.
So landmark bill for Iowa, and there's been a lot of history of first and landmark things happening politically in Iowa.
Yep.
I just gonna say off the top, I am incredibly proud of our state for being the first one to do this. now this should not be something that should have ever have to be done, but obviously we're so far down the rabbit trail of crazy. I think it's awesome that it's getting done.
Right. So the argument being brought up is, oh, well, now they're going to be isolated, or, there's going to be not segregation, but discrimination against them, right? Because this isn't in law. Well, it's still there, right? It's just that you now can't throw in whatever identity you feel like you are that day. It's just male or female, which is what it should be. Yeah. And so there's the argument of, oh, well, now we're going to be discriminated against and there's going to be all this and that. Well, no, it's still there. There's still protection for your natural gender in our state legislature. There is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's under the same workforce, right? You can't discriminate if it's a male or a female. You can't discriminate on job hiring because of sex, right? Yep. It's just taking out all the fluff and all the nonsensical whatever in there. You're male or female, and sorry, that's it. That's the way God made it to be. That's how it is. And if you don't believe that, that's not our fault. That's your own problem. Like, that's an issue that you have and you need to work through, and we can have conversations about it, but it should not be in the legislature of Iowa. It should not be in our Constitution. Nope. It shouldn't be in anything when it comes to politics, but that's where we've gotten in the last 10 years. Yeah. So,
looking at AP News, there's a whole bunch of useless.
If you can't tell,
but there's a little section that I like. It says hundreds of LGBTQ plus advocates streamed into the Capitol Rotunda on Thursday, waving signs reading "Trans rights are human rights," which I kind of want to know what that means.
Do you think they know what it means?
No. And chanting slogans including "No hate in our state."
It rhymes.
Which is another kind of cracks me up. Now hate is just anything that they don't like.
Yeah. Well, no, that's so funny, the English language. That's the danger of the English language is you can take a word and you can just make it whatever you want it to be.
Well, okay, this whole hate thing, real quick. It's just like when President Trump got elected for the second time. It's like, well, everything Trump does is now shattering democracy. Like, your candidate lost in an equal and fair election. That's democracy. Yep. So anything that Trump does that the lefties don't like, all of a sudden that's shaking democracy, like they cared about that before.
Yeah. No, I just think, I mean, you see an outrage about it, but honestly, how many of them actually understand what they're outraged about, right? Like they're only getting fed one thing.
Yep.
And so when you're constantly fed this one thing by this one person, I mean, it's kind of like a cult, right? If you're in a cult and the cult leader says, hey, you believe this, then you believe that. And if he says, well, now you're going to believe this, then you believe it, right? It's just it's like blind, mindless sheep just following a leader. And so it's a little bit the way that the whole LGBT community is, right? It's a little bit of that sense of, right, whatever the mainstream media says is wrong or right is what I believe, right? The left has become their own god. Like, yes. That is their
God of self. Yeah.
Yes. And so whatever that new feel good thing is or bad thing, right? It's like, oh, this is good, so we're all going to support this, and they're like, yay. And then it's like, this is bad, we have to hate this, and they're like, brr. Right, and that's just the way they go. I mean, it's like they have no ability to think for themselves. They just are told this is wrong, right? Yep. And then they're like, oh, it's wrong, terrible, awful. You should not be doing that. And so there's really no self-thought in them at times. They're just reliant on somebody else to tell them what to do because they have no ability to think. And the people that do start thinking and doing research, I've seen a couple videos recently, like all the people getting red pilled, right?
Yeah.
But it's when they start to, the one lady was like talking about how her husband was trying to bring up a topic and she would just get angry and like just go away, right? She would just be like, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm getting mad, like, and just stop talking about it. And then finally she was like, oh, I'm going to start figuring out why I'm getting mad and then like do my research so I can rebuttal him, right? She starts to look into it and she's like, oh, this doesn't actually make any sense. And then she slowly kind of started changing her mind on a lot of things, because it's like, oh, actually what I've been told is not the truth. And once she started looking into it, it's like, there's actually a lot of lies in here. And that's what it is, right? It's whoever with the most money wants to have something be told, that's what gets told. I mean, you look at that with Politico. Whatever the government paid them to say is what they
What was
did.
it, 19 million?
No, 32 million.
32 million. I was off by a few
Well, and
million.
it's just, this bill is just common sense. That's
It's
all
like
it
keeping
is.
women. It's like keeping men out of women's sports.
When you were born, did you have a penis or did you have a vagina? Like, that's the first thing that a doctor identifies on a baby.
It's
right?
a boy.
It's a boy. It's a girl.
Yeah.
One of those two things. So from the very moment that a baby takes its first breath in life, it's obvious whether they're a boy or girl. Okay? And that's all that's saying. That's all this bill is saying, is that, hey, you're either a boy or you're a girl. You can't just identify with whatever made up word or term you want to use. Now, it obviously does more
they
than that,
also
but that's the thing
clarified
that
sex
the
and
most-
gender, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says that gender will be assumed that you're meaning sex. And I have intentionally done this myself. I've started to avoid using the word gender altogether. And I'll intentionally make sure I use the word sex, because the word gender
It doesn't
mean anything, right? A baby has a sex at birth. Well, not at birth. At conception, a baby has a sex, and you can't change that. You can mutilate the body, but you can't change that.
Yep.
And so I've been intentional about not using the word gender, because it doesn't mean anything. And that's all this bill is doing, is it's saying gender doesn't mean anything. It just means we're going to assume you're meaning sex, and there's male and female. That's it. You can't discriminate based on those things. Bam. Easy, simple, done. That's just common sense stuff. That's all it is. But there's so much uproar and rage over a common sense bill. And the fact that Iowa is the first state to do this.
Which one do you think would be next? Florida?
I'm surprised Florida's not ahead.
I don't
Ron
I know.
DeSantis
Well,
did
I
a
don't
really
know.
good
But here's the
job.
thing. We've already seen that legislature in Florida kind of not just go along with DeSantis anymore. And then it was DeSantis' wife said that she might run for governor, and all of a sudden they were back in line. And it's Republicans don't
I like Casey DeSantis. She's nice.
Republicans don't like having to do work.
Yep.
Republicans like being able to whine about what the left is doing, because that's easy to do. That's what Republicans would rather do, and it's in most states, and it's all the way up to Washington.
Well, you see it with like like if you want to call it like the grassroots things during a lot of campaigning and that.
Yeah.
Like the Democrats, the left, they get out and are all over, right?
Yes, they do.
And it's like Republicans, there was some really bad showing.
Democrats and leftists actually have conviction what they believe. Most
That's because it's their God,
don't.
right? Well,
Yes.
and I'm going back to that, right? It's their God. It's their religion. And so as the left, it's your religion. Okay, so and this isn't a blanket across the whole thing, but I would say there's a lot of conservatives that believe in God, right? That are
Yeah, at least
we're
profess.
going to call
at
it
least. Yeah.
Christian. Okay, I'm putting that as a blanket
Loosely,
term.
yes.
Loosely. They believe in God and that there is a God, a creator, right? Like they have a different premise of I don't like the word spirituality, right? But there's something else, right?
Right.
It's not politics is not their God. Well, on the left, politics is their God.
Yep.
Okay, if that's your God, look what you do for your God. Okay, you go back to like the Baal worshippers, and they sacrifice their own children, right? And so it's like
and you see that nowadays.
yeah, but
People
you see that nowadays.
sacrifice
But
their children.
when something is that enveloping of you, right? A God is something that envelops your whole mind, body, and soul, right? That is the way a God works. Is like you give them everything. So if I'm a Christian conservative, my God is Jesus Christ, right? And so politics is something that just affects me on a day-to-day thing. And sometimes it's a nuisance, sometimes it's beneficial. Most of the time it's hopefully I just don't have to worry about it, right?
Right.
And so when it comes around, I'm going to figure out who I'm voting for. I'm going to try and keep the best people in place that line up with my core values, and that's who I'm going to vote for. And that's just kind of the way a lot of conservatives work. And so but it isn't their God, right? A lot of conservatives are those that are, and again, this is not a perfect example, and it's just kind of a generalized statement. I would say they're more heavy in the workforce, right? They're more focused on like family and actual like
America, Jesus, and freedom.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So politics is kind of a when it comes around, we'll focus on it again, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not our everyday thing. It's just kind of it's here, it's not, it's here, it's not. It's kind of in and out at times, right? And again, that's not right, perfect for everything. But on the left, and especially with what we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years with all this extreme LGBT stuff going and the transgender stuff, I think that's really actually where it hit hard was the transgender stuff.
That's the biggest thing. Yeah.
But it has become their God, and that is their whole goal in life is to pursue that religion, basically, that cult. I mean, that's what it is. It's kind of a cult. Yeah. But they are all in. And so it absolutely enrages them when someone is to, if someone were to blaspheme the name of Christ, right? Like we would be upset.
Yes.
Well, that's almost the way that this is for them. That when you step on those quote unquote transgender rights, right? It's like blaspheming their God. And so they get absolutely enraged by this, but because they're just absolutely blinded by the fact that this is their religion. This is all that they care about. A lot of them don't have families. And again, this isn't everybody, but look at a lot of the leftists. There are a lot of single people. They're usually young or angry old people, right? I mean, it's just, but a lot of them haven't had families, and they are not very heavy in the workforce, right? They're more of the lackluster kind of workforce type of thing that they only work because they need some money,
well,
or they're not. Anyway,
for instance, today I was working in Grinnell, and there was a little pride walk around this park there. It's like 30, 40 people, something like that. And so I told Zach about it, and he responded. He's like, do they not work? They're out there at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. Like,
we were working.
Yeah.
It's like
normal people are
that
working.
many people who are still at working age are out there at 12:30.
12:30. Yeah.
On a Thursday, like. That's what you have time to do.
The sad part is a lot of them do get paid to go to these things by whatever funders, donors,
George
things
Soros.
Like, yeah, right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Bill Gates, things like that, right? I mean, you got the Epstein files coming out. Probably a lot of people on those lists are who's pushing these kind of agendas and that. Mm-hmm. So, but it's like that is really sad that top tier, those people with the most money, with the most influence. This is what they're pushing. This is what they want. Mm-hmm. It all has to do with population control, right? Depopulation, population control. When you have a whole generation of kids that mutilate themselves and can't have kids, can't reproduce, right? Mm-hmm. Like, perfect. You just did the job for them that you were hoping to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just like
you reduce the population of Americans, and then you bring in immigrants to completely.
Okay, now I got a couple things here. Let's think about Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. Margaret Sanger. Now, listen, the term racism gets thrown around way too much. Like, there needs to be a distinction what actual racism is and not something you just don't like, right? Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood. She intentionally put Planned Parenthoods in predominantly black neighborhoods to try to exterminate the African race. She was very clear about that. And now you see almost the same thing, where instead of just the black population with Margaret Sanger, now you're seeing everyone.
Yep.
And, as a Christian, I always, anything that goes on in my life, I want to tie back to Scripture and understand biblically about this. And it's so obvious when we talk about this that, what God has allowed to happen. We look at Romans 1. So we can start at verse 22. So just think about what's going on with third wave feminism and this transgender thing, LGBTQ, and all these other things. Starting at verse 22, this is Paul. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore, God gave them over to their lust of their heart to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature, so self, rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for what is unnatural. In the same way, also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. Men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error.
Mm-hmm.
It's right there.
Yep. No, and it's, I don't know, you think back over it, and it started really slow, right? The devil's smart. He's been around a long time. Okay.
Over 6,000 years.
Yeah.
Young Earth creationists.
He has slowly brought this in, right? So you kind of look at the environmentalists, right? You know, with like the whole climate change and
Yep.
global warming, right? So it kind of started coming. Okay, so then they started to worship planet Earth. Okay, so that was the first
Mother,
god.
that's like they talk about Mother
Earth.
Nature.
Yep, Mother Nature, Mother
Yeah.
Earth, whatever.
Yep.
And so they kind of, that was the first god, and then it was like, oh, well, now you be you, right? YOLO, right? You only live once, and they kind of brought that in, right? And so there was this next thing of, okay, now we're going to start turning from you being a good person to now just being you. Okay, so they start to change
Your
the focus.
truth.
Yep. And so it's more of it becomes more narcissistic, and then they just have slowly brought this in. This is not a 1 year change. This is like 10, 15 years ago
Gotta build
that it
slow.
started to come in, right? Because if you do it that major, right? If you were to bring in what we have right now as far as like policies and this craziness going on, people would have been like, holy, what? No, you're out your mind. Like, get that out of here, right? It even goes back to the gay thing, right? It was like, just let us be us, right? Just don't bother us and we're fine. And then it was like, okay, now you need to be okay with who we are.
You had to, and here's the thing.
And then it was, now accept us, right? Now accept us. And now it's, you have to tell me that I'm okay, right? Like it's becoming more and more and more and more. And it constantly is just, it's this build up to, well, now I'm the guy and you can't tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I forgot what I was going to say, but essentially it's all about love of self, right? And
Pride is a really good
well, what is the basis of all sin? The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Everything that we call sin as God-fearing Christians stems from pride. All of it. And so, June, Pride Month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it's definitely when you can, if you can touch on someone's pride, right? That's a really easy subject. If I have something, okay, right, I built this house. If you wanted to talk to me about, right, I have some pride about doing that. And
There's
so it's
differences,
like, right,
though.
but it's like, but when someone's proud of something, okay, right or wrong, that they're proud of it, it's really easy for them to latch into that conversation, right? So when you touch into that pride of that side, and they're going to an even deeper level of pride of self, that's a terrible pride, but it's this idea of, oh, I'm now the only focus in the world, and you have a whole group of people that believes that, you can get some crazy people doing some crazy things.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we can go, and like I say, as Christians, we desire that, we desire salvation for mankind, obviously. So it tells us in 1 Corinthians 6 that, you know, liars, fornicators, the effeminate, depending on what version you're reading, effeminate be the KJV, more ESV would be homosexuals. Such were some of you. That doesn't mean that God cannot save them.
Nope.
He will save whom he will. And that is the great thing about God, is that even the worst of the worst, which we're among the worst, aren't we? God can save anyone.
Yep.
You know, and so there's hope for these people who are
No, there
who are,
there is.
who are
It's-
blinded.
Anybody who's ever been saved is the worst of the
Yeah.
worst.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, and it's
Doesn't
just
Paul say he's the greatest of these?
yeah,
You know.
yeah, yep.
Yep.
But it's just one of those things where the biggest thing is just the opening of the eyes, right? That understanding that politics can't be your God.
Nope.
And when it is, that's when you get into a danger. And the United States has gone really far away from God being any part of our politics. Now, when God's the focal point and politics fall in place behind that, things can go really well. I saw someone describing the way our Constitution was built. People don't want to say that it's built around Christianity, but it really is. The way
Some
our
Judeo-Christian
Constitution,
values.
yeah,
Yes.
but the way our Constitution is laid out and a lot of the laws of the land are reliant on a Christian nation. When you have Christians that are following these principles, it runs really, really well. And when you don't, things fall apart really, really fast. And so people are upset with the way that Trump is going about some of this, but I think he's bringing back some of these Christian values of sort and getting back to that. And so government and all this stuff, it functions cleaner and it functions faster and it functions healthier because it's closer to the way that it was designed to be, right? And if we want to tie this in, it's the way we were created, right? When we get further and further away from our creator God, Jesus Christ, when we get further and further away from that, we function worse and worse and worse, and we have more and more troubles. And the closer we get back to our creator and the way that we were made to be, the better we function and the better we live, the better our lives are.
Yeah, and even in spite of hard times, that I just want to clarify. I know what Jim is saying here, and just for context, he's not saying that if you're a Christian, you're close to God, that nothing bad's going to happen. Just so we're clear on that.
No.
But in the midst of hard times, drawing near to God, being saved, you have a different perspective about things. Like everything's okay because you have a heavenly perspective, not an
peace.
earthly perspective.
It's about having that peace in life. And you hear stories from people of things are completely chaotic in their life. Everything's falling apart. Job, for example.
God.
But he has peace
Job.
throughout
It's
it all,
Job.
right? Job. But he has peace throughout it all because of his relationship he had with God. You know, and that's ultimately what the Christian walk you strive for is, you know, that's what drawing near to God is it brings peace into your life. And when things are out of control, because things will be out of your control, because you're not God, so you're not in control, you still have peace no matter the situation. And I think that's kind of more that point you're trying to get to is it's having that peace in life for when things are chaotic, you know. And it's like and things are always chaotic. There's this gender madness going on. And it's like, well, how can you as a Christian feel peace about it, thinking about this world that, you know, we've all got
because it was guaranteed
kids.
to come to that, right? You read it in
Yeah.
Romans.
Well,
it's
God
a
said
guarantee to come to that.
Yeah, and it's like, how can you be about peace about, okay, how can I have a family? How can I afford to have a family? How can I even keep a house? You know, you can drive yourself crazy thinking about these things, but it's when you just trust God through it, it brings a peace. And just knowing, hey, I don't have these answers right now. Might not ever exactly have the answers, but I can be at peace about that because I'm trusting that God's the one in control.
Exactly.
So I'm going to draw near to Him.
You don't have
For that
to
peace.
figure every little detail out
No.
because of you just being reliant on God. And I think that's really what He wants, right? Is that He doesn't want us to have every detail worked out because He does. And He understands it, and He wants us to rely on Him for the little details and everything in between, but just to rely on Him for whatever today looks like, right? Whatever tomorrow looks like.
Daily bread.
Yeah, and just understanding that we get to enjoy whatever He has laid out for us, and we're going to make bad decisions and go through hard times, but He allows those so that way we can learn and draw closer to Him and have a deeper relationship. And
I couldn't have said it better. That was freaking awesome. That was great. I think
But freaking into our deep theological conversation.
friggin' awesome.
freaking awesome. I will say this.
We were just
No,
drawing
we're-
so many people in, and you just shove them right back out the door. Thanks, Zach.
No, they're coming in. They're coming in. But I think back to the story of in Genesis, Joseph and his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. This kid who is the favorite of his father because of his mother. He gets sold into slavery by his brothers into Egypt. You know, is falsely accused by his boss's wife of indiscrimination. Gets thrown. That's
kind of
fine.
true. It's kind of
It's
true.
true.
Kind of true.
Thrown to prison.
we wanna go to
becomes
today's
the head,
terms.
Becomes the you know,
The head honcho.
head
No.
honcho essentially of the,
The
prison.
head prisoner.
Yep. And
Assistant to the head prisoner.
Yeah,
assistant to the
assistant
head prisoner. Yes. And
Bringing it
eventually, you know, if you know the story, he becomes second in command to only Pharaoh himself. And what happens eventually when he reveals to his brothers all those decades later that's their brother that they sold? You meant for evil, God meant for good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're going to be doing a theological discussion at some point on what is evil, where does evil come from. That's coming in the coming days. But while God does not create evil, because he's incapable of that, he's God, he's fully holy, God will use the evil in the world to draw people to himself and to use that evil for the ultimate good. Same as the plagues on Egypt, the evil things that the Egyptians were doing, God used that for the good to show his power over the gods and to free his people, Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So even in the midst of the evil of radical feminism and transgenderism and all the attacks on the family that we see, God will use that evil for his ultimate good to show his glory and power and to save people out of this. Well, it'll be friggin' awesome.
I think that's a pretty good stopping point. I'm already pretty deep into this segment, so I don't know. I'm just happy to see this bill being passed in Iowa.
Same here.
We all
By the way,
have
a state who's going to sign it next. I bet South Dakota would be second.
South Dakota.
Yeah.
That's your money on South Dakota. I'm going with North Dakota. Kirsty Nome just started with the Fed, so they're going to be a little behind, so North Dakota's going to go first.
Okay.
I'll go Idaho.
Okay, $10 on North Dakota, people. Come back for the details on that next week.
There's some website that has those odds somewhere.
Poly Market.
Place your bets now.
There
Yep.
you go.
They're not a paid
but
endorser.
No, it is cool to see this. Just kind of makes me a little bit proud of Iowa to be the first state to do this. It's sad that we need a bill like this in the first place, but
I think would be technically a referendum, wouldn't it be?
referendum.
I'm not
I don't
sure,
know.
but either way, all I know is that it's a good
Legislation.
thing. So that's what matters.
Yeah, I don't know. Makes me proud to be an Iowan today.